Hello, this is Founder Laren, and I am with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today we're going to take a look at putting a grid on the map and resizing and also recoloring the grid. So these are some of the most base important things that one should do after you have acquired a map. So I'm going to go right into the information. So I have a map here that I have acquired from Angela Maps. She created it for this class. So what I'm going to do is add a grid to it. This is one of the first things that you will need to get used to if you're going to use Fantasy Grounds Unity if you don't already have a grid. So I'm going to unlock the map, which is pretty standard for most maps in Unity. And if you go to the far right of the toolbar, you'll see the grid icon, which I have selected now. And you can see my cursor, it is right next to it. And if you go to the grid option, you'll see that it defaults at 50 by 50. So all you need to do is turn on grid visibility. Now, when you zoom in a little, you can see the grid. And as you can tell, this grid is a little bit small for this particular map. It is kind of important to know the actual dimensions and the pixels per inch. So the actual number of pixels per 5 foot square. So in this case, this is actually 4 times smaller than it should be. So I'm going to increase this width here. So I'm going to go up to 200 by 200, which is the pixels per square inch. And as you can see, it now lines up with this doorway. It looks a lot cleaner. Another thing you want to look for is the corners of your map. If they're lined up like this, that's a good sign. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's closer. If you grab stray maps off the internet, or if you find something that already has a grid on it, you might have trouble lining it up. It's potential that someone's resized or messed around with its original formatting. So what'll happen is you'll be able to line up the squares in one area, but as you get further away, it starts going out of alignment. And that is because these squares are not actually square anymore. They're probably more rectangular. So you can combat this by unclicking the aspect lock ratio and playing around with that. Or you can use a program that is on the forums. It is called Map Align, and it basically allows you to stretch the image so that it will fit the grid. But that is a very lengthy process. It's better if you grab a map that doesn't already have a grid on it. But if you don't have that option, there are some things you can do to try to help with that. Another thing is you have a distance multiplier, so you can change how much the square represents. And then you also have your suffix here. And then if you have a map that needs to be adjusted, you can use these little fine tuning nudge up, nudge down. And there's some smaller ones. They're kind of hard to click on, but they allow up to 1/10 of a really small increment, basically like 1 pixel. Basically, it can move the width of this line. The lines themselves cannot be adjusted. However, if you want a better color so it stands out, so as you can see, this kind of washes out in the background. So if that's the case, then you want to go ahead and click on tint. And you can color to your liking. So if you use like a yellow so it kind of stands out more, use the alpha slider down below to make it brighter or more visible. So you're just changing the opacity in this case. I kind of like it about 3/4 of the way up at the most. And then if you want to theme it to the background or you want it to kind of blend in, you can also use the eyedropper and hover over any colors in your map to help it stand out with the rest. So if you wanted to use this green, for example, that really blends in with the background. So it's hard to see the lines by doing that, but you can kind of theme it. Click on the color that you want to use and go from there. And as you can see, those types of colors are harder to see because they're kind of blending in with the background. So you have to kind of pick your battles on that. But basically, that's what I wanted to show was how to place the grid. That's the most important part. Some of the things you want to look for are, if they're lining up on the edges here, you want to play around with the visibility of the grid, obviously, because the default gray one quite often gets washed out. So that's why I usually change it to this yellowish color. Because usually you can see that even if you turn it down, you can see the lines. And then you have your distance multiplier, and then you have your fine adjustments. So if you didn't like that this wasn't right up against the edge here, you can use that to move your grid. So it's just kind of up to you how you want to handle it. This is just a tutorial about the grid. So I don't really have much else to say on this other than play around with it and get used to it. It's a good idea to have the actual dimensions of the map and the pixels per inch. So the pixels per inch is kind of important. This helps you set up the map, but you can also eyeball it too. Another way you can do a grid is I'm going to go ahead and right click on the map. If you want to remove the grid, go to layers, and you can turn the grid off, and you can actually draw your own grid. So if you don't want to use this tool up here, you can right click, go to layers, click on set grid, left click and hold your mouse down and then drag, and that'll get you pretty close, and you can make these bigger or wider. So that's another way you can do it. This is kind of like the old way that you do it in Classic, but as you can see, it's harder to line things up. That is where that other thing comes into play, where you can drag and move these positions around, and you can play around with these numbers. But it's easier if you just know the number. So if I know it's 200 by 200, that's pretty good. But as you can see, it's not lined up anymore. So if you want to line something up and you already have the grid on, you can actually manipulate this layer. So if I go to the layer tool and then I select the actual grid itself, you can move that into place and then lock it, and that way it doesn't move again. So that's a way that you can adjust it if you accidentally move it. But it's a good idea to lock the grid, at least lock the map when you're all done putting the grid on. That way it doesn't move on you. So I think I covered most everything. Hopefully that helps you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.